Good morning. I'm Kevin Walker, Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Overland Park Chamber of Commerce. Today, I'm joined by Representative Jerry Stogsdill, who is the Democratic candidate for Kansas House District 21. This interview is co-hosted by the Northeast Johnson County Chamber and the Leawood Chamber, and is part of the series of forums and interviews being conducted on behalf of the Johnson County Public Policy Council. The Johnson County Public Policy Council, comprised of 10 chambers of commerce serving Johnson County, developed today's questions focusing on business and community issues. We will start with a brief opening statement followed by our Q&A. At the conclusion of the interview with our candidate, we'll have time to make a closing statement. Jerry, thanks for joining us today. At this time, I'd like to invite you to make your opening comments.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and chat with you. It's always good talking with you. And also appreciate all the people that are tuning in today to find out possibly what's going to be happening in the legislature next year. For those who don't know me, I'm State Representative Jerry Stogsdill. I represent the 21st District, and that is mostly Prairie Village with parts of Overland Park and Leawood and Mission Hills. I'm running for my third term, and I presently serve on the Taxation Committee, the Federal and State Affairs Committee, and the Education Committee. And I'm looking forward to a very interesting session of the legislature next year.
Well, Jerry, thanks for that. And why don't we dive right into our questions. And the first one, tell us, what are your top 3 policy issues that you hope to address next session?
Well, I think everybody's top priority next year is going to be how do we recover from COVID-19? And that's going to be a complicated process, I think. We have to make sure that we come out of this with Kansans as healthy as possible. And we also have to do it in a way such that we can rebuild our economy. And I would like to see us take this opportunity to look at how do we rebuild that economy even better than where it was before the virus hit us. And that is going to, I think probably the next 2 years, we're going to be looking at those kinds of questions on how to rebuild a lot of our institutions across Kansas. And the other, you said 3, I guess the second one, I think is full funding of our public schools, colleges, and universities. And I think that for both the responsibility that we have for our children to provide them with the best education possible, but also from an economic development standpoint. I've always thought that we approach education funding the way that we talk about it completely wrong. We talk about putting money into education like it's this black hole that we just pour money into and never see it again. Well, if you look at it in realistic terms, it is the biggest economic stimulus package in the state of Kansas. And I've told people, you know, this money goes out to every city in the state, every school district, and that money is then distributed among our teachers, our administrators, our custodians, our bus drivers, all that sort of thing. And then where does that money go? Into the economy in those cities. So if people say, well, we need to cut the budget. Well, I say, you know, if I've been in front of a couple audiences and I said, how many of you are small business owners? Raise your hand. And I said, do you think it's a really good idea to cut back on the money that your customers receive that they spend in your businesses? So cutting education, which I know is probably going to be the first thing on the agenda on our friends across the aisle from us this year. I think that's a horrible idea, especially coming out of a pandemic like this. And then the third thing for me is Medicaid expansion. We've passed it through the House twice, and it has been totally rejected in the Senate every time we've sent it over there. And the chief roadblock to that has been the president of the Senate, and of course she's not going to be back next year. So maybe there's hope that we can get that expanded. But I think this year, to have turned down the money that we could have gotten from the federal government to address healthcare issues here in Kansas, to help stimulate our economy, to help those small hospitals that are in problems across the state, I think that was just absolutely reprehensible. And it costs lives. It's cost lives for the last 8 years that we could have been in this program. And it's cost the state billions of dollars in our federal tax money being returned to the state of Kansas. And I think that has to be addressed, and this is the perfect time to do it. We are now surrounded by states that have passed Medicaid expansion. Even the more conservative Missouri just passed it. So Missouri, Nebraska, Colorado, and Oklahoma all have Medicaid expansion, and we're just this island of non-compliance with that. And I've told people, I said, we might as well just walk over the state line, hand our checks to our friends over in Missouri and say, stay healthy. And I think this is going to be the year that we get Medicaid expansion passed.
Well, you've touched on several issues that we'll expand on a little bit later in our questions. But before we do that, let me talk to you about the state budget and ask you, how would you propose to balance the state budget? What specific budget cuts would you support? And what revenue enhancements would you consider, if any?
Well, I think it's all speculation at this point. Over the last couple of years that I've been on the tax committee, I do think that we need a complete review of our tax structure in Kansas, especially coming out of this pandemic. I don't know exactly what we'll be looking at. I don't think anybody does until we get back there in January and see what our revenues look like, to see what condition the virus is affecting our state. I tried to get information last January on the impact of the collapse of the aircraft industry in Wichita, what that's going to do on our economy. I didn't think at that time that our economy at the national level was going to continue at the rate that it was. And now, of course, it's even been exacerbated by the virus and everything. So I think that the one thing I do think is that we really need to look at the distribution of our revenues through income tax, sales tax, and property taxes. Obviously, here in Johnson County, that's one of the things I hear most from my constituents is these property taxes are killing me. And I think we've got to look, I think we've depended far too much on property taxes and sales taxes to fund government functions in the state. And I think that's all part of coming out of the Brownback tax experiment that we had for 7 years in the state. So I think we need to really sit down and look at that and make our decisions at that point. But I think as far as specific things go, I think it's going to depend on what we find when we get back to Topeka in January.
Sure. And talk to me a little bit about how you would propose we grow and develop the state's workforce going forward.
That's a real pet issue with me, because for the first 2 years that I was in the legislature up there, I served on commerce, economic development, and labor. And as far as I was concerned, I didn't see anything being addressed as far as labor goes. I think labor is an extremely important issue going forth in Kansas here. And I think we ought to have a specific task force that looks at our labor issues both now and in the future. And I think we ought to include the chambers. I think we ought to include our colleges and universities in that discussion. I think we ought to include our labor leaders in Kansas and so on. And I think, fourthly, we need a specific labor committee in Topeka that looks at labor force development, where our unions fit in, all of that sort of thing. So I think if we do that, again, it's an opportunity to review what we need and how we really are going to address that. But I think we don't use our colleges and universities enough in those issues. We don't use labor leaders enough in those issues. And I think if we can all get together, we can come up with a plan that will make Kansas extremely attractive to attracting the kind of labor needs that we need here in Kansas.
And you've already touched on this issue, but I'd like to ask you about your views on K through 12 public education funding.
Right. And well, we just made it constitutional over the last session. And obviously we need to stay in constitutional compliance with our school funding and so on. But again, as I say, I think it is obviously the biggest economic stimulus package in the state of Kansas. It's the largest piece of our budget and so on. But that money is distributed all over the state. And I think to cut back on that is going to cut back on our economic stimulus. I think it's going to hurt our economic development. I think it's going to hurt the ability for us to attract and retain the very best teachers for our children. And I think it is a super economic development issue in the fact that, you look at Johnson County. What brought people to Johnson County? It wasn't fewer trees in Jackson County, Missouri. It was our public schools. And I think that if we start taking money away from our public schools and so on like that, we're going to see a decrease in our economic development in Kansas and our ability to attract the kinds of companies we want to locate here in the state of Kansas.
But I want to follow up on economic development since you've mentioned that a couple of times as well. What types of economic development policies would you support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas?
Well, I think we have to make it attractive to businesses to come here. We do need, as I say, we need a review of our income tax program. We need a group that looks like it's taking a serious look and developing serious programs for the needs for our labor requirements in Kansas. I think we need to strengthen the Department of Commerce. I think David Tolan over there in his group is doing a fantastic job. They had a mess when they came into that 2 years ago. And I think David is really doing a good job of straightening out that department and marketing Kansas as a good place to come and do business and so on. And I think that if we can look at labor, we can look at taxes, we can look at economic development, we can look at continuing our economic stimulus programs and so on in Kansas. I think people are going to be looking at Kansas and saying, they're doing some interesting things there. Maybe we ought to take a look at them for locating a new company or expanding our company. We've also got to take care of our transportation needs. We're in the center of the country. We're in a perfect position to offer good transportation, both east and west, north and south through Kansas, and we ought to be taking advantage of that. And again, I think it's this whole opportunity coming out of this crisis to look at all of our institutions in Kansas and really focus on how do we maximize those programs in order to attract business to Kansas. But I think education is absolutely the number one priority, because I know the high-tech companies that I represented when I was president of the Silicon Prairie Technology Association. They will not come to a place where they think the public schools are substandard and our colleges and universities cannot produce the kinds of employees that they need for their companies.
And another question I have that you've touched on a little bit is around tax policy. And I wondered if you would expand a little bit more on your views on our state tax policy and, be as specific as you can on what you think we should do.
Well, I think we should continue looking at how we use STAR bonds, how we use the HPIP programs, how we use the PEAK programs, that sort of thing. I think we need to look at the states and the communities and so on around the country that we compete with. Take a look, what does their tax structure look like? What do we need to do to compete with those states and those cities and so on that compare to the cities and the state of Kansas? And again, I think that we need to rebalance our tax structure so that we are having closer to a third of our taxes come from property taxes, income taxes, and sales taxes. So I think if we can do those sorts of things, I think it'll make it very attractive for businesses to stay here and businesses to come here.
I want to shift gears a little bit to healthcare policy and ask you about your thoughts on healthcare policy in general and Medicaid expansion specifically.
Okay, well, first I want to give a shout out to Governor Kelly. She did a wonderful and a very courageous thing in shutting down our schools and imposing policies that helped us keep our COVID rates lower in Kansas and certainly keep the death count lower in Kansas. And I'm rather sensitive about that because within 3 blocks of us, we had a facility where they've had 26 COVID deaths. It's not a hoax; it's a real thing, and I think that's been terrific. The job that she's done, and I obviously Medicaid expansion is something that we absolutely have to have. We cannot continue to turn down billions of dollars in federal funding coming back to the state of Kansas. Think what would have happened if we would have had another $5 billion circulating in our economy, which we could have had if we would have had Medicaid expansion when it was first offered to the state of Kansas. And so I think that to me is an absolute no-brainer. We have hospitals out there that are just operating on a razor-thin margin, and all the hospitals that I've talked to, all the hospital administrators and so on, plead for that. I think as part of that also is mental health facilities. We don't talk about that quite as much as I think we should. And I know when I talk to my chief of police here in Prairie Village and ask him, every year that I've asked him, I said, what would you like for us to advocate for you to make your job safer and more efficient and so on. And he said, Jerry, he said, I'm not asking, I'm begging you, more mental health facilities, more mental health beds and so on like that. And he said, if there's not a bed available at Shawnee Mission or Advent now, we have to put these people in jail. They don't belong in jail. So there's a whole variety of questions around that mental health stuff that was completely underfunded and undervalued under the previous administration, and we're just now building back to a point where I think we should be.
And closing in on the last of our questions, I have two left for you. First, what do you think most distinguishes you from your opponent in the race?
Experience. And I think I've had a wide variety of experience in my life that has really helped me with the legislature. I have 3 degrees from Kansas State. I'm a native Kansan, 4th generation native Kansan, as a matter of fact, so I understand Kansas, I think. I have, my first degree was in history from Kansas State. I have another bachelor's degree in elementary education and a master's in curriculum and instruction. So I feel like I'm pretty well knowledged in education, especially since I was a teacher in Shawnee Mission for 7 years. I was a teaching assistant in the College of Education and at K-State for 2 years. And then I served 3 years as president of the Teachers Association, NEA Shawnee Mission. I was their full-time president for 3 terms. When I went over and took over as the president of the Trade Association for the high-tech industries, one of the first things I had them do was to create an educational foundation, where we created a whole number of programs that brought together high-tech industries in our public schools. And they were fantastic programs. I'm going to recommend, as a matter of fact, a couple of them to the Education Committee. I'm an entrepreneur. I've had 3 successful companies. I sold one. I still have the other 2. I have a real estate investment company and I have a fine arts photography company. So I've had, and I'm also a former naval officer. So I've had experience with military, which of course Kansas has a number of military facilities and so on here, and which I've helped in a couple occasions up at Fort Riley get programs on developed up there that have helped them, especially in their hospitals and so on. And so I think I have a wide variety of experiences in Kansas that maybe my opponent hasn't had the opportunity to have. So I think my experiences fit in well with the committees that I serve on, and I just think, it's experience.
My last question for you, the pandemic has hit many Kansans and many Kansas businesses very hard.
Right.
What do you think the role should be of the state legislature in dealing with the pandemic?
Well, I think we need to understand exactly what has happened to the state. And I think that's going to take some study. And when we get back, we're going to have to be able to work more cooperatively this year in a nonpartisan basis. And I think that's going to be a question of leadership up there. I think it's been very partisan in the last 4 years that I've been up there, which I've been very disappointed in. I've gone out of my way to meet as many Republicans and know as many Republicans, work with as many Republicans as I possibly can up there. I think there's a lot of Republicans over there that would like to work with Democrats across the aisle to come up with bipartisan ideas and legislation and so on, but leadership has not allowed that. When I came in 2016, there were 51 of us that were new, biggest class ever in the Kansas legislature. And we came up there with the idea of doing away with the brownback tax experiment. And through a coalition of moderate Republicans and Democrats, we were able to do that. Well, I think there was about 27, 28 moderate Republicans that came into that class with me. There's like 2 left. And they have been taken out, not by us, but as Democrats, by their own party because of their moderation. That's a function of leadership. And I think we have to have leadership that is committed to doing things in a bipartisan basis. And if we don't, I think it destroys chances of a really excellent education coming out of the legislature. So I think that's going to be a key issue when we get back this year. And of course, we won't know about that until after the election in November.
Well, that's it for our questions. I want to give you a chance to wrap up with any closing thoughts and comments you might want to offer.
Well, again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've been very disappointed that under certain conditions, I haven't been able to go door to door this year. I really enjoy that. That's the fun part of campaigning as far as I'm concerned. And it's great to I've got a lot of good ideas, a lot of good input and so on like that from people that I've met at the doors. When 2016, I went to 4,000 doors and enjoyed every moment of it. So it's been really frustrating for me on that. And but I am making lots and lots of phone calls, and I do want to encourage anyone in my district or around Johnson County, anything like that, if they have any questions for me, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I would love to discuss it with you. You can reach me on my through my website at jerryforkansas.com. Email me at jws4414@aol.com, and don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I think we're going to be in for one of the most important sessions we've ever had in the Kansas legislature next year. I have no idea what it's going to look like yet. Whether it's going to be, we're kind of dealing with the same thing the schools are dealing with right now. Is it going to be virtual? Is it going to be a hybrid? Are we going to be back in person? And we won't know that until January. So anyway, I'm just trying to communicate with my constituents as much as possible. And hopefully I've done a good job for them. And I look forward to representing them again in the next session of the legislature. And thank you, Kevin, for your input. And you've been terrific to work with in Topeka. And I always enjoy the input from the chambers and so on. And I think we basically have the same concerns and goals of what we want to see for Johnson County, for our chambers, and for the state of Kansas.
Well, we certainly appreciate your service to the county and the people of Kansas. And, you know, on behalf of the Policy Council, let me say thank you for spending a little time with us this morning. Yeah. I'll remind everyone that this has been recorded. We will post it on our votejoco.com website where you can view this and other candidate forums. And finally, let me just remind folks that advance voting by mail begins on October 14th. Advance voting in person begins on October 19th. And then, of course, Election Day is on November 3rd. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you.